One single mother accidentally called her boss asking for help for her baby, and the CEO said, "Don't worry, I will save my son." The revelation changed everything, and a forbidden romance began. Get ready, because this story will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment where you are watching from. The early hours of Tuesday arrived heavy, with a suffocating humidity that clung to the skin like a second layer of clothing. In a small two-room apartment in Southside Chicago, Sarah Johnson woke up startled by the piercing cries of her 3-month-old baby. The digital clock flashed 4:37 a.m., and the dim light from the street lamp filtered through the torn curtain, creating dancing shadows on the peeling walls. "Shh, my love. Mommy is here," she murmured, quickly getting up from the mattress on the floor. Her bare feet met the cold concrete floor, and she felt a shiver run up her spine. Ethan, her little treasure with big dark eyes, was too red and hot. Too hot. Sarah was a 28-year-old woman who carried a strength that seemed disproportionate to her slender frame. Her curly hair was tied up in a messy bun, revealing a delicate face marked by determination. She had sun-kissed skin and brown eyes that sparkled with a mix of tenderness and stubbornness inherited from her grandmother from Illinois. Since she was 16, when her father left without explanation, leaving the family in poverty, she had become the pillar supporting her sick mother and 2 younger siblings. She worked as a cleaning lady in one of the largest corporate complexes on Michigan Avenue, waking up at 4 in the morning to catch 3 buses and arrive at work before 7. Her personality was shaped by a fierce need for independence, but also by an unconditional love that made her accept immense sacrifices. "Oh my God, you're burning up, baby," she whispered, pressing her lips to Ethan's forehead. The temperature was alarming. Her hands trembled as she searched for the cheap digital thermometer she had bought at the corner pharmacy. 104 degrees. Panic settled in like a tight fist in her chest. She had no money for a private hospital, and the health clinic wouldn't open for another 3 hours. Ethan cried in a different way, a cry that cut through her soul like a sharp blade. "I need to call Emily," she thought, remembering her sister who lived in rural Illinois and worked as a nursing technician. With trembling fingers, she dialed the number she knew by heart, but in her rush and desperation, she mixed up 2 digits. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. On the other end, a deep, sleepy male voice answered. "Hello, who is this?" Emily, please help me." Sarah burst into tears. "Ethan has a very high fever. I don't know what to do. I'm desperate. He's burning up, sis. I'm scared She couldn't finish the sentence. On the other end of the line, there was an unsettling silence. "I'm sorry, but I'm not Emily. You've dialed the wrong number," the voice said, now more awake, with an accent that mixed the formality of Chicago with hints of rural Illinois. "Please, don't hang up," Sarah screamed in despair. "My son is dying. I have no one to help me. I don't have money for the hospital. I don't know what to do." Ethan screamed even louder in her arms, and she felt a cold drop of sweat trickle down her back. The vulnerability in her voice echoed through the silent apartment. Something in the voice of that desperate mother touched Eduardo Mendes in a way he couldn't explain. At 42, he was the CEO of Mendes and Associates, a Brazilian multinational specializing in technology that occupied 3 floors of one of the most imposing buildings on Michigan Avenue. Tall, broad-shouldered, and with graying hair at the temples, Eduardo had dark green eyes that reflected the seriousness of someone who carried the weight of a family empire. Raised between the traditions of his grandmother's coffee farm in Poços de Caldas and the skyscrapers of Chicago, he had learned early. On that responsibility and power walked hand in hand. He wore impeccable suits, drove imported cars, and lived in a 300-square-meter apartment in the Gold Coast. But behind all that facade was a deeply lonely man. "Calm down. Take a deep breath, he said, sitting on the empty king-size bed. Where are you? Southside. I live in Southside, she sobbed. My baby is 3 months old. He's never been sick like this. Eduardo knew that area. His company's social responsibility teams developed educational projects there. The social distance between his world and hers was vast, but at that moment, there was only a desperate mother and a child in danger. Listen, I'm going to send a private ambulance to pick you up right now. What's your exact address? You don't have to. I can't pay. Don't worry about that right now. Give me your address. Sarah hesitated for a second. Accepting help from a stranger went against all her principles of independence, but Ethan's cries were louder than her pride. 847 Maple Street, apartment 23. The ambulance will be there in 15 minutes. It's going to Northwestern Memorial Hospital. I'll meet you there. Why are you doing this? She asked, through tears. Eduardo was silent for a moment. He didn't fully know how to explain it himself. Something in her voice, in the raw and genuine vulnerability, had touched a part of him that had been dormant for years. Because every child deserves to be saved, he finally replied. When the ambulance arrived, Sarah was dressed in her best pair of jeans and a simple white top. Ethan wrapped in a crocheted blanket that her mother had made. During the ride to the hospital while the paramedic, as Sarah cared for the baby, she wondered who that man was and why he had decided to help a complete stranger. At Northwestern Memorial Hospital, Eduardo waited in the reception area. When he saw Sarah coming down from the ambulance with Ethan in her arms, something twisted in his chest. She was younger than he had imagined, delicate but with an evident strength in her careful gestures with the child. "How is he?" were his first words. "The doctors are examining him," she replied, avoiding looking him directly in the eyes. "Sir, I don't know how to thank you." "Eduardo, my name is Eduardo Mendez." "Sarah Johnson." She extended her hesitant hand. "Do I work at your company?" Eduardo frowned. "At Mendez and Associates?" "I'm a contracted cleaner. I clean the 32nd floor every morning." It was as if his world had stopped for a second. For 5 years he had walked those corridors every day, and she had been there, invisible like so many other contracted workers. The universe had a cruel irony. They waited together in the hospital corridor until the pediatrician came out with good news. Ethan had a common viral infection, nothing serious, but it required proper medication and monitoring. "Everything will be fine," Eduardo said, seeing the relief in her eyes. "Don't worry, I will save my son." The words escaped his mouth before he could process what he had said. "My son." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah stared at him with wide eyes, and Eduardo felt the blood freeze in his veins. "What did you just say?" she whispered. The invisible line between them had transformed into an abyss. Neither of them was prepared for the magnitude of what that phrase had revealed. The hospital corridor seemed to have turned into a time capsule, where every second stretched like an eternity. Sarah held Ethan against her chest, feeling her own heartbeat echoing in her ears like war drums. Eduardo stood 2 meters away from her, his face pale and fists clenched, as if trying to hold back the words that had already slipped out. "My son," he had said. The 2 simplest and yet most devastating words that could exist at that moment. You said, my son," Sarah repeated, her voice barely a whisper. Her brown eyes were fixed on his, searching for an explanation that made sense. A denial that would restore order to the world. Eduardo ran a hand through his graying hair, a gesture that revealed his complete lack of control over the situation. He, who led meetings with hundreds of people, who made million-dollar decisions without blinking, was utterly lost in front of that frail woman and her baby. "That's not what I meant to say," he tried, but the words sounded weak even to him. It was a misunderstanding, a figure of speech. A figure of speech? Sarah took a step back, instinctively protecting Ethan. A man doesn't just say, "my son," out of nowhere about a baby he doesn't even know. The pediatrician chose that exact moment to return, carrying a clipboard with test results and a professional expression that didn't register the electric tension in the air. "Ms. Johnson, the results are in. Ethan is fine, but he needs to take this antipyretic every 6 hours for the next 3 days," he said, extending a prescription. "And gentlemen, is there any family history of allergies we should know about?" "Gentlemen?" Sarah repeated, looking confused between the doctor and Eduardo. "Mr. Mendez here informed us that he is the child's father when he authorized the treatment," the doctor explained innocently, consulting his notes. "It was necessary for us to proceed with the emergency procedures." Sarah's world collapsed. Her legs gave way, and she had to lean against the cold wall of the corridor. Ethan, oblivious to the drama unfolding, had peacefully fallen asleep in her arms, his breathing finally steady. "You did what?" she whispered to Eduardo, who looked visibly shaken. "I needed to authorize the treatment, and they required a legal guardian." He tried to explain, but the fury in her eyes made him stop. "Thank you, doctor. We will discuss the next steps at home," Eduardo said to the doctor, who nodded and walked away, leaving the two alone again. "We? At home?" Sarah practically growled. "Who are you? Why did you say you are Ethan's father? And why—" She paused, the pieces of the puzzle starting to fit together in a way that terrified her. "When was Ethan conceived?" Eduardo closed his eyes. "March of the previous year." He remembered perfectly because it had been during the most stressful week of his life when he was finalizing the purchase of a German company. He had drunk too much at a bar in Lincoln Park, something completely out of character for him. "March," he admitted quietly. "The corner bar in Lincoln Park," she completed, her voice now heavy with cold anger. "March 15th. The silence that followed was different from the previous one. This one was heavy, laden with mutual recognition and a truth neither of them wanted to accept. Eduardo remembered the woman from the bar, beautiful, intelligent, who had talked to him about everything except work and money. She had said she worked in cleaning, but he had been too drunk to connect the dots. He remembered her eyes, her genuine laughter, the way she had refused when he offered to pay for a taxi, preferring to leave by bus. "You didn't recognize me," she said, more as a statement than a question. I wasn't well that night," he admitted. "I had just discovered that my ex-wife had cheated on me with my business partner. I drank more than I should have. And I had just lost my job because the cleaning company went under." Sarah added, her voice bitter. "My friend Lisa took me out for drinks, said I needed to forget my problems for a night." They stared at each other, two strangers who had shared a night of vulnerability and were now discovering that they had created a life together. "That's why you didn't want my number that night," David said, recalling how she had left without a trace. "And that's why you didn't insist," she replied. "I thought it was just one night, that it didn't mean anything to you." Ethan stirred in her arms, making a soft noise. Instinctively, David reached out, stopping inches from the baby's face. The features were undeniable. The shape of the eyes, the way the nose curved, even the small birthmark on the chin that David had. "Can I?" he asked, hesitantly. Sarah hesitated. Her whole life had been built around independence, not needing anyone. Accepting that Ethan had a father, especially a wealthy and powerful one, meant relinquishing the control she had fought so hard to maintain. But when she saw David's expression, not the calculating gaze of a businessman, but the lost look of a man who had just discovered he was a father, she relented. David held Ethan with excessive care, as if he were made of crystal. The baby opened his eyes, the same green eyes David saw in the mirror. Every day. "Hi, little one," he whispered, his voice faltering at the end. "Don't think this changes anything," Sarah said quickly, fighting the emotion that threatened to overwhelm her at the sight of father and son together. "I raised him all the way here alone. I can keep raising him." "I know," David replied, not taking his eyes off Ethan. "But now that I know of his existence, I can't just pretend I don't." "And what do you intend to do? Give me child support, weekend visits?" David finally looked at her. "Honestly, I have no idea. 6 hours ago, I was a childless man, and now I have a 3-month-old son I know nothing about." "Ethan Alexander Johnson," she said suddenly. "He was born on December the 2nd at City Hospital. He weighed 7 pounds and 2 ounces. He likes to sleep on his stomach, hates cold baths, and when he cries a lot, the only thing that calms him is me singing, 'You Are My Sunshine.'" The information poured out of her in a torrent, as if she wanted to prove she knew every detail about the son David had lost. "Why Alexander?" he asked. "It was my father's name," she replied, then regretted revealing something so personal. Ethan began to whimper, and David awkwardly tried to rock him. "Not here," Sarah said, taking the baby back. "He needs to be fed." The practical reality of the situation hit them like a bucket of cold water. It was almost 6 in the morning. Sarah needed to feed Ethan, and they both had to work that day. She at his office. "How is this going to work now?" David asked. "At work, I mean." "Just like it always has," Sarah replied firmly. "I do my job, you do yours, and we pretend this conversation never happened." "And Ethan?" She hugged her son tighter. "Ethan is my problem." David knew she was wrong. Ethan was his problem too now. But he also knew that pushing the issue at that moment would only make Sarah build even higher walls between them. "I'll take you home," he offered. "No need. I'll call an Uber." "With what money?" The question was direct, almost cruel, but necessary. Sarah bit her lower lip, a gesture David had begun to identify as a sign that she was struggling with her pride. "Fine," she relented, "but only to my place, and that doesn't mean anything." During the ride in David's silent car, a BMW that cost more than her salary for 5 years, Sarah looked out the window at the still empty streets of Chicago. Ethan slept peacefully in the back seat, in the car seat that the hospital had lent them. "Sarah," David said when they stopped at the traffic light in front of the Murrumbee overpass. "What?" "Thank you for not stopping me from holding him." She didn't respond, but David saw her reflection in the glass. For the first time since they had reconnected, Sarah Johnson was crying. The week that followed that early morning at the hospital was the strangest in both of their lives. Sarah arrived at work every day at exactly 7 in the morning, wearing her navy blue uniform from the temp agency, her hair pulled into a perfect bun, and a determined expression that fooled no one who knew her well. The 32nd floor of Smith & Partners had become an emotional minefield. She cleaned the offices with mechanical efficiency, carefully avoiding the hallway that led to the executive suite. David, in turn, had completely changed his routine. He arrived earlier and left later, but always found an excuse to walk through the hallways she cleaned. "Sarah, you've been acting strange this week," observed Mrs. Johnson, a woman in her 50s who had worked in cleaning for over a decade and had become a motherly figure to Sarah. They were in the break room, preparing coffee for the executives. "Strange how?" Sarah asked, pretending to focus entirely on the task of arranging the imported porcelain cups. "You look like a cat on a hot tin roof," Mrs. Johnson said, her experienced hands working quickly with the dishes. "And on top of that, the boss is acting strange too. He came here to the break room 3 times yesterday, something he has never done in 5 years. Sarah felt her stomach churn. The last thing she wanted was to create rumors or draw attention to her situation. "It must be a coincidence, Mrs. Johnson." "Coincidence, my foot," the older woman huffed. I've worked here long enough to know when something weird is going on, and you, my dear, are hiding something." Before Sarah could respond, David's deep voice echoed. "In the break room." "Good morning." Mrs. Johnson immediately straightened her back and lowered her head in a respectful bow. "Good morning, Dr. David. How can I assist you?" David looked impeccable in his charcoal grey suit, but Sarah noticed small details that betrayed his tension. The slightly crooked tie, his fingers nervously drumming on his thigh, the way his eyes sought hers and quickly diverted when they met. "I wanted a coffee," he said. A pathetic explanation, considering he had an Italian espresso machine in his office. "Of course, sir. Sarah, go get the doctor's special coffee," Mrs. Johnson ordered. "No need. For the special," David quickly said. "Any will do." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Mrs. Johnson looked from one to the other, her feminine intuition picking up on the strange vibes in the air. Sarah prepared the coffee with slightly trembling hands. When she extended the cup to David, their fingers briefly touched, and she felt an electric shock run up her arm. "Thank you," he murmured, and there was a weight to that word that went far beyond courtesy. "You're welcome," she replied, her voice almost inaudible. David left the break room but paused at the door. "Oh, Mrs. Johnson, I need to speak with the cleaning team supervisor about adjustments to some employees' schedules, operational efficiency issues." Mrs. Johnson frowned. "Of course, Doctor. Any specific problems?" No. I just want to ensure that all employees have the best working conditions possible." When he left, Mrs. Johnson turned to Sarah with an investigative look that made the young woman feel like a teenager being interrogated by her mother. "Sarah Johnson, what's going on?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't give me that. The most powerful man in this company doesn't come down. Here 3 times a week just to drink bad coffee, and you act like you've seen a ghost every time he shows up." Sarah busied herself energetically with cleaning the counter, avoiding her colleague's penetrating gaze. How could she explain that the ghost was real and sleeping in the makeshift crib in her room? That afternoon, David did something he had never done. He personally visited the Human Resources Department instead of sending an assistant. "I need information about the contracted employees," he said to the supervisor, an efficient woman named Sylvia. "Is there a problem, Dr. David?" "Not exactly. I'm thinking of implementing an extended medical assistance program for all contracted employees. I want to know about dependents, family situations, that kind of thing." Sylvia looked at him in surprise. The company already offered one of the best benefits packages in the market for direct employees, but contracted workers were rarely included in special programs. "It's a wonderful initiative, sir. I can prepare a complete report. Specifically, I would like to start with the cleaning team. And is there any female employee with small children on that team?" "Yes, a few. We have Sarah Johnson, who works on your floor, in fact. She has a very small baby. Poor thing, she's a single mother." David felt something tighten in his chest upon hearing the confirmation. "Did she mention any specific difficulties? Child health issues, anything like that?" "Not that I know of, but I can discreetly investigate." "Yes, please. And Sylvia, this stays between us for now. I don't want to raise expectations before finalizing the program details." While David tried to find subtle ways to help, Sarah faced her own battles. Ethan had completely recovered from the infection, but the bill from the private hospital had arrived. $15,000 that she didn't have. "How can it be 15,000? She asked over the phone to the hospital's finance department while walking down Michigan Avenue during her lunch break. Ethan was peacefully sleeping in the borrowed stroller from her neighbor. "Ma'am, comprehensive tests were performed, a specialist consultation, state-of-the-art medication. The amount is within the expected range for the procedure," the attendant explained coldly. But I didn't authorize all that. I just wanted them to check his fever. According to our records, Mr. David Smith authorized all procedures as the child's legal guardian. Sarah hung up the phone and sat on a bench in the park, feeling the world spin. $15,000 was more than her entire yearly salary. David had solved one problem and created another, much bigger one. That afternoon, while she was cleaning the executive bathroom near his office, David appeared at the door. "Can we talk?" "I'm working," she replied without looking at him, scrubbing the mirror harder than necessary. "It's about the hospital bill." Sarah stopped cleaning and finally faced him. "I will pay every cent. It may take time, but I will pay." "Sarah, you earn $1,200 a month. It would take over 10 years to pay that bill. And so, I take responsibility for my obligations. But it wasn't your responsibility. I authorized the tests because you pretended to be his father," she whispered furiously, looking around to make sure no one was listening. "Because I am his father," David replied quietly but firmly. "We're still not sure about that." "Sarah—" "Look, Dr. David," she interrupted him, reverting to formal treatment. "I know you're trying to help, but I don't need your charity. I'll go to the hospital today and negotiate a payment plan." "And how are you going to do that carrying Ethan?" The question caught her off guard. It was true. She couldn't take a 3-month-old baby to a negotiation that could last for hours. I'll figure it out," David sighed. "Let me go with you." "No, not as what you think I am, as someone who has responsibility in all this." Sarah studied him for a long moment. There was something in his voice, a sincerity she hadn't expected to find. "Today at 6, she finally conceded, "at the hospital, but that doesn't mean I've accepted that you are Ethan's father." "Understood." "And it doesn't mean I need you." "Also understood." "And if any employee here finds out that we—" David simply said, "I'll fire him on the spot." When Sarah came out of the bathroom, David stood there for several minutes, looking at his own reflection in the mirror she had cleaned. The man looking back at him was the same as always, but something in his eyes had changed forever. That night, at the hospital, they sat side by side in the financial reception like an ordinary couple settling their child's bills. The irony of the situation did not go unnoticed by either of them. "The amount can be paid in up to 24 installments," the attendant explained, "but we must inform you that there is a monthly adjustment." Sarah quickly did the mental math. Even in installments, it would take half of her salary for 2 years. "Can it be paid in full?" David suddenly asked. "Of course, and there's a 15% discount for payment in full." "Then we'll pay in full," he said, pulling out his credit card. "No," Sarah said firmly. "I already told you that." "Sarah," David interrupted her, his voice low but determined. "If Ethan is my son, and deep down you know he is, then it's my obligation to take care of his health. This isn't charity, it's fatherhood." She looked into his eyes and saw something she didn't expect. Not pity, not superiority, but a genuine sense of responsibility mixed with something she wasn't ready to name yet. "Okay," she whispered, "but that doesn't change anything between us." "I know," he replied, though they both knew it was a lie. When they left the hospital, Ethan woke up and started to whimper. Instinctively, David reached out his arms, and Sarah, to her own surprise, handed him over. "Hey there, little guy," David murmured, and Ethan immediately calmed down, as if he recognized the voice. In that moment, in the hospital parking lot under the yellow light of the street lamps, the three of them looked like a real family. And that terrified Sarah more than any bill she couldn't pay. Helena Johnson always knew when something was wrong with her son. At 72, the matriarch of the family had developed a keen intuition that even the best business deals couldn't deceive. Sitting in her Italian leather armchair in David's office, she watched her son with eagle, eyes while absently flipping through a financial report. "You're different, David," she said bluntly, her voice carrying the authoritative tone she had used to run the company before handing control over to him. David looked up from the computer screen, trying to appear casual. Helena was an imposing woman, with grey hair always tied up in an elegant bun, wearing one of her traditional sober-coloured suits. There was a hardness in her face that years of corporate leadership had chiseled, but also a sharp intelligence that missed nothing. "Different how?" he asked, though he knew exactly what she was talking about. "More absent, more worried. And don't come to me with work stress stories, because I know you better than anyone." David sighed. 2 weeks had passed since that night at the hospital, and keeping the secret was becoming harder every day, especially since he couldn't stop thinking about Ethan and about Sarah. "It's complicated, Mom." "Complicated like that mess with Patricia?" Helena referred to David's ex-wife with the disdain she reserved for people she deemed unfit for the family. "Because if it is, I'll tell you right now that I won't tolerate any more scandals." "It's not about Patricia." Helena closed the report and leaned forward, her green eyes, identical to David's, shining with predatory interest. "Then what is it about?" Before David could respond, the secretary entered the room without knocking, something she would never do under normal circumstances. "Mr. David, forgive the intrusion, but there's an emergency on the ground floor. Security said one of the cleaning staff is unwell and specifically asked for you." David's blood ran cold. "Which staff member?" "Sarah Johnson, sir." David stood up so quickly that he knocked over his chair. Helena watched her son's reaction with growing suspicion. "I'll be right down," he said, heading for the door. "David," Helena's voice stopped him. "Since when do you personally care about contracted staff?" He turned around, knowing that any explanation would only raise more suspicions. "Since I became responsible for the well-being of everyone who works in this company," he replied, quickly leaving. On the ground floor, David found Sarah sitting in a chair at the reception, pale and visibly shaken. Lisa, her best friend who worked as a nurse at the city hospital, was kneeling beside her, holding her hand. "What happened?" David asked, approaching quickly. Lisa looked at him suspiciously. She was a 30-year-old black woman with long braids and an expression that made it clear she was not easily intimidated. "And you are?" "David Johnson. I'm a friend of Sarah." "Friend?" Lisa raised an eyebrow. Sarah didn't mention any wealthy friends. "Lisa, stop," Sarah said weakly. "David, I'm sorry to bother you. I told security that I didn't need to call you." "Of course you did. What's going on?" "Daycare," Sarah said simply, and David saw tears welling up in her eyes. "The daycare where I leave Ethan, they said they can't take care of him anymore." Lisa explained with the efficiency of someone used to handling crises. "The owner of the daycare passed away yesterday. The children are going to close the place. Sarah has nowhere to leave Ethan starting Monday." David felt his chest tighten. Without daycare, Sarah couldn't work. Without a job, she wouldn't be able to pay rent or buy milk for Ethan. "What about other daycares in the area?" he asked. "There's a 6-month waiting list," Lisa replied bitterly, "and the private ones cost more than her salary." "I'm going to have to quit my job," Sarah said, her voice choked. "There's no other way." "No," David said firmly. "You're not quitting your job. We'll figure something out." "We?" Lisa repeated, looking at David with even more suspicion. "Sorry, but who are you in her life?" The silence stretched for seconds that felt like hours. David looked at Sarah, who averted her gaze, clearly not ready for revelations. "I'm someone who wants to help," he finally said. "Why?" Lisa wasn't giving up easily. "Because every working mother deserves support," David replied, but his voice carried an intensity that suggested deeper motivations. At that moment, Mrs. Johnson stepped out of the elevator. She had come down to personally investigate what had upset her son so much. Her eyes quickly scanned the group, cataloguing every detail. The young woman crying, the protective friend, and David with an expression she had never seen before. "David, what's going on here?" she asked, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. Sarah looked at the older woman, elegant, imposing, clearly powerful, and instinctively shrank back in her chair. "Mom, this is a delicate situation." "What kind of situation?" Mrs. Johnson stepped closer, studying Sarah with growing interest. "And you are?" "Sarah Johnson," she replied softly, trying to stand up respectfully. "The cleaning staff," Mrs. Johnson noted, recognizing the navy blue uniform. "And what has upset you so much that my son came down personally to check?" "Daycare issues," Lisa replied when she saw that Sarah was too shaken to speak. "Nothing that concerns the company." Mrs. Johnson raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. And why would my son feel compelled to get involved in the personal problems of a contracted employee?" The question hung in the air like a ticking time bomb. David knew his mother had picked up on something, and Mrs. Johnson never backed down when she sensed a secret. "As I said, Mom, it's complicated." "Complicated," Mrs. Johnson repeated slowly, her eyes fixed on Sarah again, studying her young face, the genuine sadness, the way she avoided looking directly at David. "How old is your baby, dear?" 3 months, Sarah replied automatically. Mrs. Johnson did some quick mental calculations. 3 months of life plus 9 months of gestation. 12 months ago, David was going through a messy divorce with Patricia. "And the father of the child?" Mrs. Johnson asked with a casualness that fooled no one. "Mom," David said in a warning tone. "Not present," Sarah replied, lifting her chin, with a dignity that Mrs. Johnson recognized and reluctantly admired. "What a shame," Mrs. Johnson said, but her eyes remained fixed on Sarah. "Men who abandon their responsibilities are despicable." "He didn't abandon," Sarah said quickly, then blushed upon realizing she had revealed more than she intended. "I mean, the situation is complicated." Mrs. Johnson smiled coldly. The word complicated had appeared twice in the same conversation, and she didn't believe in coincidences. "David, I need to talk to you now." "Mom, I'm in the middle of—" "Now," she repeated, and the tone allowed for no discussion. David looked at Sarah, frustrated that he had to leave her at that moment. "Lisa, can you take her home? I'll stop by later to talk about the daycare situation." "Do you have her address?" Lisa asked, her suspicion growing even more. "I do," David replied, and immediately regretted it when he saw Mrs. Johnson's gaze sharpen like a hawk spotting its prey. In the elevator, Mrs. Johnson remained silent until they reached the 32nd floor. In the office, she closed the door and positioned herself between David and the exit. "Now you're going to tell me exactly what's going on." "Mom, David Johnson, I didn't raise you to be a liar, and I definitely didn't spend 40 years building this company to see it compromised by whatever this is." David sat heavily in the chair behind the desk. He knew Mrs. Johnson too well to try to deceive her. When she wanted the truth, she got it one way or another. The child, her baby. Yes? There's a possibility it's my child. The silence that followed was absolute. Mrs. Johnson remained still for so long that David began to worry. "Possibility," she finally said, her voice dangerously low. "It's a complex situation." "Stop with that word," Mrs. Johnson exploded. "Either it's your child or it's not. There's no possibility in paternity. We haven't done a DNA test yet. But you think it is." Yes, I think it is." Mrs. Johnson slowly sat down in the chair across from the desk, processing the information. When? When what? When did you get involved with her? March of last year? During the divorce? Yes. And she never reached out to you? Never asked for money? No. She didn't even know who I really was, and I didn't recognize her until recently. Mrs. Johnson studied her son's face, looking for signs of deceit or manipulation. What she saw surprised her, genuine vulnerability. How did you find out? David told her about the wrong call, the hospital, everything. Mrs. Johnson listened in silence, her expression growing darker with each detail. And now, what do you intend to do? I don't know. She's too proud to accept help, but they need it. They? Ethan. The baby. Mrs. Johnson stood up and walked to the window overlooking the city. Chicago stretched infinitely ahead, a maze of concrete and dreams where stories like this happened every day. David, do you have any idea what this means for the company, for our family? I know it's complicated. Stop with that word, she shouted again, turning to face him. This isn't complicated. This is potentially devastating. An employee of the company pregnant with your child, raising a baby in precarious conditions while you live in a $5 million apartment? Mom, it wasn't like that. The press would love this story. The millionaire CEO who abandons his child with the cleaning lady. I didn't abandon. I didn't even know. Do you think that matters to journalists? David fell silent, knowing she was right. There's more, Mrs. Johnson continued, her voice now as cold as ice. If this child is really yours, they have a right to inheritance. Do you have any idea of what does that represent in financial terms? Money isn't the problem here. Money is always the problem, David, and people like her know that. She's not like that. How can you be sure? You've known her for 2 weeks. I know enough to see that she would rather struggle than accept help. Sarah studied her son for a long moment. There was something in his voice, when he spoke about Sarah, a tenderness she had never heard before. You're getting emotionally involved with her, she said, and it wasn't a question. David didn't respond, but his silence was answer enough. This stops here, Sarah said firmly. You're going to do a discreet DNA test. If the child isn't yours, you walk away completely. If he is yours, we'll settle this financially. A generous allowance in exchange for total discretion. And what if I don't want to settle just financially? Sarah looked at him as if he had lost his mind. Then you're more involved than I thought. And that, David, is a very serious problem. When Sarah left the room, David was left alone with his thoughts. Through the window, he could see the city where Sarah was heading home, where Ethan was probably waking from his afternoon nap, where a completely different life from his unfolded every day. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he had already memorized. Sarah, it's me. About the daycare situation. I have a proposal. On the other end of the line, Sarah held Ethan tighter, as if sensing that the storm approaching would be much larger than a simple work-related issue. Sarah's home in Southside starkly contrasted with any environment David had ever known. When he parked the BMW in front of the 4-story building with peeling paint and bars on the windows, he felt a knot in his stomach that had nothing to do with fear, but rather with shame. Shame for never having truly looked at where the people who cleaned his office every day lived. Took you long enough, said Lisa when she opened the door to apartment 23. She had stayed behind to watch Ethan while Sarah took a shower and tried to organize her thoughts. Murray, your friend is here, she shouted into the apartment. David stepped into the small room that served as both living room and kitchen. The space was clean and organized, but evidently poor. A 2-seater sofa dominated the living area, with a small television resting on a wooden box. On the other side, A compact refrigerator and a 2-burner stove completed the kitchen. Photos taped to the wall showed Sarah with an older woman, probably her mother, and 2 young men who must have been her brothers. "The bedroom is over there," Lisa indicated, with her head toward a slightly open door. "Ethan is sleeping in the crib that the neighbor lent us." David peeked discreetly. The room was even smaller, with a single bed, a small wardrobe, and the simple wooden crib where Ethan slept peacefully. Clean, ironed baby clothes were hanging on an improvised clothesline in the corner. "You can sit," Lisa said, but her tone wasn't exactly welcoming. "Sarah will be right out." David sat on the edge of the sofa, feeling completely out of place. Lisa watched him with critical eyes as she prepared coffee in a small Italian coffee maker. "So, you're the friend who showed up out of nowhere," she said, not trying to hide her distrust. "Sarah and I have known each other for a short time," David replied carefully. Lisa served the coffee in 2 small cups and offered one to him. The coffee was strong and sweet, completely different from the espresso he drank at the office. "And how exactly does a rich businessman become friends with a cleaner?" "Lisa," Sarah's voice came from the hallway, "stop interrogating the man." She entered the room wearing faded jeans and a simple red top. Her hair was still damp from the shower, falling loosely over her shoulders. David found her more beautiful this way than many socialites he knew with their designer dresses. "Sorry about Lisa," Sarah said, sitting down on the sofa next to him, but keeping a careful distance. "She's a bit protective." "Rightfully so," David replied, looking at his friend. "It's good to know you have someone looking out for you." Lisa seemed slightly surprised by the response. "Well, I'll leave you two to talk," she said, grabbing her bag. "Sarah, call me if you need anything. And you," she said to David, "if you hurt her or Ethan in any way, you'll have to deal with me, and I'm not small." After Lisa left, an awkward silence filled the apartment. Sarah nervously fidgeted with her hands, and David didn't know where to start. "About the daycare," he finally said. "David, I've thought about everything. I'm going to quit on Monday. There's no other way." "There is. Let me help you." "How? Are you going to pay for a private daycare for me? That costs $2,000 a month, more than my entire salary. What if that's exactly what I'm offering? What if I pay?" Sarah abruptly stood up, starting to pace back and forth in the small space. "You don't understand, do you? I don't want your charity." "It's not charity, Sarah. If Ethan is my son—" "If," she repeated bitterly. "Always that if. You're not sure of anything, but you want to play the responsible father." "Then let's be sure," David said, standing up as well. "Let's do the DNA test." Sarah stopped pacing and faced him. "And then, if he's your son, what changes?" "Everything," David replied without hesitation. "What do you mean, everything?" "I will take responsibility. Ethan will have everything he needs, education, health, a future. And me." The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" "Do I come with that package? The mother of your child that you're going to take care of, as if it were an obligation?" David ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "That's not what—" "Then it's the—" "What? You're going to give me an allowance? A house? Make me your official mistress? Sarah, that's how it works in your world, isn't it? The rich man gets the maid pregnant, then he gives her some money and solves everything. You're being unfair." "Unfair?" She let out a bitter laugh. "Unfair is you showing up in my life, messing everything up, and now wanting to buy me off with your heavy conscience." Ethan started crying in the bedroom. Sarah went to get him, returning with the baby in her arms. David felt his chest tighten at the sight of his son, because deep down he already knew it was his son, test or not. "Look at him," Sarah said, her voice now softer. "Look closely. He has your eyes, your nose, even that little mark on his chin that—" "You have," David looked. It was true. Ethan was a miniature version of him. "He's beautiful," David murmured. "He's mine," Sarah said firmly. "I carried him for 9 months. I went through 20 hours of labor alone. I woke up every night in the first months. He's my son, and mine too. Biologically, maybe, but a father is someone who raises, who cares, who is present. Do you want to be Ethan's father, or do you just want to clear your conscience?" The question hit David like a punch to the stomach. He looked at Sarah holding Ethan, saw the fierce love in her eyes, the instinctive protection, the way the baby calmed instantly in her arms. "I want to learn," he said softly. "I want to learn how to be a real father." Sarah studied him for a long moment. "And your family? Your mother who came down to the building today? Is she going to accept a bastard grandchild from a maid?" David remembered the conversation with Mrs. Johnson, the veiled threats, the pressure to resolve everything financially. "My mother will have to get used to it," he said, but his voice didn't sound as convinced as he would have liked. "David, I'm not stupid," Sarah said, sitting back down. "I know our social difference is huge. I know you live in a world I can't even dream of knowing. And I know that one day you will get tired of playing family with the maid and the bastard child. It's not like that. It is. It may not be now, but it will be. And when that happens, the ones who will suffer are me and Ethan." David knelt in front of her, looking directly into her eyes. "Sarah, look at me. I don't know how this is going to work. I don't know how to reconcile my world with yours, but I know I can't pretend Ethan doesn't exist anymore, and I know that I can't stop thinking about you." Her eyes widened slightly. "David, I know I'm a stranger to you. I know my money scares more than it helps, but give me a chance. Let me try to make this right." "Make what right? Be a father. Be whatever you want me to be." Ethan chose that moment to make a soft noise, as if commenting on the conversation. Sarah looked at her son, then at David. "One chance," she finally said, "but with conditions." "What conditions?" "First, no direct money. I'm not going to become your dependent. But the daycare, you can pay for the daycare as an advanced child support. But I will keep working." David nodded. "Second condition. You want to meet Ethan? Great. But it's here, in my territory. I'm not taking him to your world until I'm sure you're serious. And third, we do a DNA test. Not because I have doubts, but because you need to be sure. And if it comes back positive, we can talk about how it's going to be from there." David extended his hand. "Deal." Sarah hesitated for a second before shaking his hand. The touch was brief, but David felt an electric current surge up his arm. "But David," she said, not letting go of his hand, "if you disappoint me, if you disappear from his life after raising expectations, I swear you will have to deal with me. And I'm not as nice as you think." "Understood." "And one more thing," she added, finally releasing his hand. "Your mother, she looked at me today like I was a bug. If she tries to humiliate me or buy my silence, she won't do that. She will. People like her always do. But I'm not easy to break, David. I've been through worse than a stuck-up lady." David knew she was right about Mrs. Johnson. He knew his mother too well to have illusions about how she would react in the long run. "I'll talk to her." "You don't need to defend me," Sarah said proudly. "I can defend myself. I just want you to know that I won't accept being treated like trash." Ethan started whimpering again, and Sarah automatically began to rock him. "He's hungry," she explained. Do you want to stay while I breastfeed him?" The question was loaded with meaning. It was an intimacy, a moment of vulnerability she was offering. "If you don't mind." Sarah went to the bedroom and returned with Ethan and a blanket. She sat in the corner of the sofa and discreetly began to breastfeed him. David watched, fascinated by the naturalness of the gesture, the evident love on her face. "How was it?" he asked softly. "The pregnancy, the labor, everything." "Difficult," she replied simply. "Nauseous all the time in the first months. I worked until the 8th month because I needed the money. The labor was through Medicaid, alone, because my mother is sick and couldn't come from Illinois." David felt a pang of guilt. "If I had known—" "You were busy being betrayed by your ex-wife," Sarah said without bitterness. "Life goes on for everyone." They sat in silence for a few minutes, listening only to the soft sound of Ethan breastfeeding. "David," Sarah said suddenly, "can I ask you a question?" "Thing." "Sure. Why do you drink alone in a dive bar?" The question caught him off guard. "Do you remember that night?" "I remember everything from that night. You were a wreck. You talked about betrayal, about not being able to trust anyone." David sighed. "I had found out that Patricia was cheating on me with my best friend, and they were trying to screw me over in business too. That's why you were drunk." "That's why I was drunk. And you? Why did you pay attention to me? I was just another rich guy whining." Sarah smiled for the first time since he had arrived. "You seemed lost and sincere. Most men who try to strike up a conversation with me at the bar want one thing. You just wanted to talk. And we talked all night. We did. About everything except money and work. You told me about your grandmother, how she raised you on the farm before you moved to Chicago." David had forgotten he had mentioned his grandmother. "She passed away when I was 15. She was the most important person in my life. You said she taught you that a person's worth has nothing to do with their bank account." "She would say that about you," David said, looking at Sarah. "She would have loved you." "I don't know," Sarah replied. "She would think I'm too stubborn." "She loved stubborn people. She used to say that those who don't fight for what they want don't deserve to have it." Ethan finished feeding, and Sarah burped him. David hesitantly extended his arms. "Can I?" She hesitated for a second before handing Ethan over to him. David held him with excessive care, but Ethan immediately snuggled against his chest. "He likes you," Sarah observed, surprised. "Or maybe he recognizes the smell," David murmured, gently touching the baby's little face. "Maybe." They stayed like that for an hour, whispering while Ethan slept in David's arms. They talked about work, dreams, fears. When it was time for David to leave, he didn't want to go. "Tomorrow is Saturday," he said, carefully passing Ethan back to Sarah. Can I come back?" "If you want, but I warn you, Saturday is cleaning day around here." David smiled. "I can help." "You? Cleaning?" "Why not? I've done worse things." Sarah laughed, and the sound filled the small apartment with a joy David hadn't felt in a long time. "Okay then, but don't come in. A suit. I promise." When David left the building and got into his car, he looked up at the window of apartment 23, where a light was still on. Inside that small space, a simple but genuine life happened every day. And for the first time in 42 years, he wanted to be a part of it. In the apartment, Sarah placed Ethan in the crib and prepared to sleep. But before she did, she looked out the window and saw the BMW still parked down below. David was looking up, and when their eyes met across the distance and the glass, she felt something stir in her chest, something that scared her more than any financial problem, the possibility that maybe, just maybe, David Mendez was sincere. Saturday arrived with a typical fine drizzle of Chicago, creating a melancholic atmosphere that spread through the neighborhoods of the South Side. David woke up at 6 in the morning in his apartment in the Gold Coast, but instead of the usual workout routine at the building's private gym, he dressed in a pair of jeans he hadn't worn in years and a simple polo shirt. Looking at himself in the mirror, he barely recognized himself without the impeccable suit. In Southside, Sarah had been awake for an hour, taking advantage of Ethan still sleeping to tidy up the house. She wore a faded tracksuit and had her hair tied up in a messy bun. When the doorbell rang at 8 in the morning, she hesitated before opening the door. "Good morning," David said, holding a plastic bag. "I brought breakfast." Sarah looked suspiciously at the bag. "What kind of breakfast?" "French bread, butter, ham, cheese, normal stuff," he replied, noticing her expression. "I bought it at the bakery on the corner." "You went to Mr. Wackham's bakery?" she asked, surprised. "The short guy with the mustache? He insisted on telling me his whole life story while making the sandwiches." Sarah couldn't hold back a smile. "He does that with everyone. Come in." The apartment was even cleaner than the day before, if that was possible. David could hear Ethan babbling happily in the bedroom. "He woke up just a few minutes ago," Sarah explained, following his gaze. "Want to see his morning routine?" David nodded enthusiastically. In the small room, Ethan was lying in the crib, kicking his legs in the air, and making soft sounds. When he saw David, his green eyes widened and he smiled, the first genuine smile David had witnessed. "Hi, my prince," David murmured, extending his finger for Ethan to grab. "How did you sleep?" "He always wakes up in a good mood," Sarah said, watching the interaction. "It's only at night that he gets cranky." "Can I hold him?" "You can, but he needs a diaper change first." "Want to learn?" David swallowed hard. "Learn to change a diaper?" "It's part of fatherhood," Sarah said with a mischievous smile. "You can't just have the fun part of holding him." The next 15 minutes were a comedy of errors. David struggled with the sticky tabs of the disposable diaper, almost knocked the powder onto the floor, and grimaced when Ethan peed right at the moment of the change. "It's normal," Sarah laughed, cleaning up the mess. "Baby boys always do that. It's like they know exactly the wrong time." "How did you learn all this?" David asked, finally managing to close the diaper correctly. "Trial and error. And a lot of YouTube videos," she admitted. "The first time I changed his diaper, it took me 20 minutes. After breakfast, Sarah began the weekly cleaning. David watched her work, impressed with the Sarah Johnson took great care of every item in her small home. "Can I help with anything?" David offered. Sarah looked him up and down. "Do you know how to do anything domestic?" "I know how to order food on DoorDash," she laughed. "All right. You can watch Ethan while I clean the bathroom." David sat on the couch with Ethan in his lap, trying to entertain the baby. He started telling work stories, then, feeling ridiculous, began to sing country music he remembered from his grandmother's. "Farm days." "You sing well," Sarah said, appearing in the bathroom doorway with rubber gloves on. "He likes it." "My grandmother used to sing those songs when I was little." "Tell me more about her," Sarah requested, returning to the bathroom. David continued singing and talking about his grandmother while Sarah worked. He shared stories about mornings on the farm, how she taught him to milk cows at 8, and the values she tried to instill in him. "She raised you well," Sarah commented when she returned. "I can see you have a good side, even being wealthy." "Thanks. I guess." "That was a compliment," she assured, picking up Ethan to breastfeed. "Rich men without hearts are a dime a dozen around here." David watched her breastfeed Ethan again, fascinated by the naturalness of the gesture. "Can I ask you a personal question?" "More personal than you slept with me and had my child. Go ahead." He laughed. "Your family, do they know about Ethan, about who his father is?" Sarah's face closed off slightly. "My mom knows the father isn't around, My brothers think it was a boyfriend who disappeared. It's easier that way. And they live in Illinois? My mom does. She's sick, complicated diabetes. My brothers are here in Chicago. Luke works at a local garage. Jake is finishing high school and stays with me sometimes. And your dad? He disappeared when I was 16. Left 5 kids and a sick wife to fend for herself. The bitterness in her voice was palpable. Men who abandon their children are everywhere. David understood the implication. I'm not going to abandon Ethan. You haven't abandoned him yet, she corrected. The relationship between rich and poor is always complicated. One day you'll get tired of coming here, pretending our reality is interesting. It's not pretending, Sarah. Sarah, she repeated, raising an eyebrow. Sorry. I meant Sarah. Sarah's fine, she said softly. I'm not used to affectionate nicknames. Ethan finished breastfeeding and fell asleep. Sarah placed him in the crib and returned to the living room, where David was flipping through an old magazine he found on the coffee table. David, she said, sitting next to him. Can I ask you a question now? Sure. Why do you want this? To be Ethan's father, to come here? Why? You have enough money to do anything in life. David was silent for a moment, organizing his thoughts. Do you know what the hardest thing about having a lot of money is? I have no idea. It's never knowing if people like you are your bank account. My ex-wife married me for the money. My friends are all opportunists. Even my mum sometimes treats me more like the CEO of the company than as her son. Sarah studied him. And you think I'm different? I know you are. You barely accept my help with basic problems. If you were opportunistic, you would have sought me out when Ethan was born. And if I was smart, maybe I would have done that. But you didn't, because you have pride, you have dignity. Those are things money can't buy. Pride doesn't pay the electric bill, she said pragmatically. No, but it makes the difference between being a decent person and being a parasite. They sat in silence for a few minutes. The rain had intensified outside, creating a constant sound on the roof. David, Sarah finally said, I'm going to be very direct with you. Go ahead. I like you. I liked you that night at the bar. I like you now. You're different from what I expected from a rich man, but I'm scared. Scared of getting used to you, of letting Ethan get used to you, and then you deciding this isn't for you. What if I promise that won't happen? Every man promises, David. My dad promised my mom he would take care of us forever. David turned to look at her completely. Sarah, look at me. She looked at him, and he saw vulnerability in her brown eyes that she was trying to hide. I'm not your father, and you're not my ex-wife. We're two people trying to figure out how to make this work. And what if it doesn't work? Then at least we tried, and Ethan will know that we tried. Sarah bit her lower lip, thoughtful. There's something I haven't told you. What is it? That night at the bar, it wasn't just sex for me. David felt his heart race. What do you mean? I knew you weren't going to seek me out. A man like you doesn't seek out a woman like me. But I thought about you for weeks afterward. Sarah, let me finish, she interrupted him. When I found out I was pregnant, for a second I thought about seeking you out, but I didn't even know your full name. I only knew you worked in business. And then I thought, what difference would it make? You'd think I was trying to trap you. You'd offer money for me to abort or disappear. Would you have sought an abortion if you had the money? David asked, his voice tense. No, she replied without hesitation. Never. But you couldn't know that. David moved closer to her on the couch. And now, what do you feel now? Fear, she admitted. A lot of fear. Because it's very easy to like you, David. You're kind, you're funny, you're a good man beneath all that wealth. And that terrifies me. Why? Because when you leave, not if, when, it will hurt much more than the first time. David reached out and gently touched her face. What if I say I don't want to leave? I would say you still don't know your own life, your mother, your obligations, your world. My world can include you and Ethan. It can't, David, and deep down you know that. He looked at her for a long moment, seeing the sadness mixed with hope in her eyes. Can I kiss you? He asked softly. It's not a good idea. Why? Because it will complicate an already complicated situation. Sarah. And because if you kiss me now, I will want you to stay. And you can't stay. David stepped back slightly, respecting her space. You're right. I'm sorry. You don't need to apologize for wanting to kiss me, she said with a sad smile. It's just, let's take it slow, okay? Ethan needs to come first. Always, he agreed. Ethan chose that moment to wake up, crying softly. Sarah went to get him, returning with the baby, who immediately calmed down when he saw David. He really likes you, she noted, and I like him. A lot. You're going to be a good father, Sarah said, sitting next to David with Ethan in her lap. Really? Yes. You have patience, you have affection, and more importantly, you want to learn. They spent the rest of the afternoon in the small apartment. David learned how to prepare a bottle, discovered that Ethan liked classical music on the phone, and even managed to make the baby laugh with funny faces. When it was time to leave in the late afternoon, David felt as if he were leaving a piece of himself in that apartment. Can I come back tomorrow? He asked at the door. Tomorrow is Sunday, a day of rest. For you too? Sarah smiled. For me, there is no day of rest. Babies don't have weekends. Then I can come back tomorrow, he repeated, but this time it wasn't a question. You can, she agreed, but David, yes? Thank you, for today, for trying, for being you. He kissed her forehead gently, a paternal gesture that wasn't directed only at the child she carried in her arms. Thank you, Sarah, for letting me be a part of this. When David left, Sarah stood by the window watching the BMW drive away in the rain. Ethan babbled something that sounded like approval, and she hugged him tighter. What do you think, my love? She whispered to her son. Can we trust him? Ethan smiled, and for a moment, Sarah allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could work out. Monday arrived loaded with tension for both. David had spent the entire Sunday at Sarah's apartment, helping with Ethan and discovering little details about her life that fascinated him. How she sang softly while folding the baby's clothes, how she knew all the neighbors by name, how she turned simple ingredients into delicious meals. But now, in the sterile environment of the private lab in Lincoln Park, the scientific reality imposed itself over the feelings that had been growing between them. Ethan was restless in Sarah's lap, as if sensing the importance of the moment. It won't hurt, my love, Sarah whispered to her son as the technician prepared the materials to collect the baby's saliva sample. David was visibly nervous, running his hand through his hair repeatedly. He had chosen the most discreet and expensive lab in the city, ensuring that confidentiality would be absolute. Mr. Smith, said the technician, a middle-aged woman in a pristine lab coat, we have collected the baby's sample. Now we need yours. The process was quick and painless. In 15 minutes, everything was done. The results will be ready in 72 hours, the technician explained. We will send them via email and phone as requested. In the lab parking lot, they remained silent in the car for a few minutes. Ethan had fallen asleep in the baby carrier that David had bought, the first of many items he insisted on providing. Are you sure you want to know? Sarah finally asked, looking out the window. I am. And you? I already know the answer, she replied simply, but you need to be sure to move forward. Sarah, David, regardless of the result, I want you to know one thing. He turned to face her. What? These last few days have been the best I've had since Ethan was born, maybe since my father left. Why? Because for the first time I didn't feel alone, she admitted, her voice almost a whisper. And Ethan, he smiles more when you're around. David felt a lump in his throat. Sarah, Shh, she interrupted him. Let the results come in. Then we can talk. 3 days turned into an eternity. David couldn't concentrate on work, checking his email obsessively and avoiding his mother, who had started asking increasingly direct questions about his strange behavior. Sarah kept her routine, but David noticed she was quieter, more thoughtful. He continued visiting her every night after work, always bringing something. Diapers, clothes for Ethan, or simply a dessert he knew she liked. On Wednesday afternoon, Mrs. Johnson decided she had waited long enough. She showed up at David's office unannounced, bringing with her a brown envelope that she placed on the desk. I need to talk to you, she announced, closing the door behind her. Mom, I already told you that. I hired a private investigator, she interrupted, pointing to the envelope, to find out everything about this Sarah Johnson. David stood up abruptly. You did what? What any responsible mother would do, protect her child from a potential scam artist. Mom! Open the envelope, David. With trembling hands from anger, David opened the envelope. Inside were photos, documents, detailed reports about Sarah's life. Photos of her leaving the building where she worked, entering the daycare with Ethan, shopping at the market. How could you? He whispered, flipping a young single mother, hard-working with no criminal record, no significant doubts beyond the normal for her social class. David stopped flipping through the papers and looked at his mother, confused. What are you saying? Mrs. Johnson sighed and sat down in the chair across from the desk. I'm saying your investigator found absolutely nothing compromising. About her, nothing, not even a late credit card bill. David sat down slowly, still processing the information. She didn't know who you were that night at the bar, Mrs. Johnson continued. She never searched for you online afterward, never tried to reach out, never mentioned your name to anyone, not even to her best friend. Why are you telling me this? Because, Mrs. Johnson sighed deeply, maybe I judged the situation too hastily. David looked at her in surprise. He rarely heard his mother admit she was wrong about anything. She's genuine, David, a genuinely good person, genuinely independent, genuinely perfect for you. Mom. But that doesn't change the fact that you live in completely different worlds. And if that child is really yours... David's phone rang at that moment. The number was from the lab. Hello? Mr. Johnson. This is from Chicago Lab. The paternity test results are ready. Would you like us to email them or I'll pick them up in person? David said, quickly hanging up. Mrs. Johnson watched him get up and grab his car keys. Where are you going? To get the results. And then I'm going to tell Sarah. David, Mrs. Johnson called as he reached the door. If the child is yours, we need to talk about the future, about the business, about the family. Mum, I'm not abandoning Ethan or Sarah. I know. That's why we need to talk. David left the office with his heart racing. At the lab, he received a sealed envelope that shook in his hands. He didn't open it there. He wanted to be with Sarah when he learned the truth. He arrived at Southside earlier than usual. Sarah was in the small kitchen preparing dinner, pasta with simple tomato sauce, but it smelled better than any dish from the expensive restaurants David frequented. You got here early today, she noted, noticing his tense expression. Did something happen? David showed her the envelope. The results came. Sarah stopped stirring the sauce and turned to him completely. Ethan was in the baby seat on the table, playing with a colorful rattle. "Did you open it?" "I wanted us to open it together." Sarah took off her apron and approached him. "Are you ready? And you?" "I already told you. I already know the answer, but I'm ready for you to know too." David carefully tore open the envelope. He took out a letterhead sheet and began to read aloud. "Paternity test, David Johnson Jr., Ethan Alexander Johnson." His voice faltered. "Continue," Sarah whispered. "Probability of paternity, 99.97%. The silence that followed was absolute. Ethan stopped shaking the rattle, as if he understood the magnitude of the moment. 99.97%, David repeated, looking at Sarah. "He's your father," she said simply. "I'm his father. He's your father." David dropped the paper on the table and, without thinking twice, picked Ethan up in his arms. The baby looked at him with those identical green eyes and smiled. "Hi, son," David said. His voice choked. "Hi, Ethan. I'm your father." Sarah watched the scene with tears in her eyes. There was something profoundly moving about seeing David holding Ethan, now knowing for sure that they were father and son. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Happy," David replied without hesitation. "Terrified, but happy. And now," David looked at her, then at Ethan. "Now the three of us need to figure out how to be a family." "David, I know, we're very different, come from different worlds, but Sarah, look at him, look at our son." "Our son," she repeated, as if tasting the words. "Our son deserves to have both parents present in his life, not weekend visits, not child support sent by a lawyer. He deserves to have a real family." Sarah sat heavily in the kitchen chair. "A family like what, David? You living in the Gold Coast and us here in Southside? You coming here when you have time between important meetings?" "No," David said, sitting next to her, still holding Ethan. "I was thinking of something more permanent." "Permanent how?" David took a deep breath. "Marry me." The boiling pasta in the pot was the only sound in the apartment for several seconds. "What?" Sarah whispered. "Marry me, you and Ethan, let's be a real family." "David, are you crazy?" "Maybe," he admitted, "but Sarah, these last few days have been the best of my life. Waking up thinking about you, about Ethan, coming here after work, helping with his routine. I feel complete for the first time." "David!" "I love you," he said suddenly, the words spilling out before he could think about them. "I love both of you." Sarah looked at him with wide eyes. "You don't even know me well." "I know enough. I know you're strong, independent, caring, that you're an amazing mother, that you make me want to be a better man." "And me? I didn't say I love you." "You don't need to say it. Not now. You just need to accept to try." Sarah got up and went to the stove, turning off the heat under the pot. She turned her back to David for a long moment. "Do you have any idea what you're asking?" she finally said. "I'm asking for a chance for us to be happy. You're asking me to leave my life, my job, my independence, and move into your world where I don't know anyone, where everyone will look at me like the housekeeper who took the boss. No one will look at you like that." "They will," she turned to face him. "And do you know why I know this? Because your mother already looks at me like that." David couldn't deny it. "Sarah, my mother will have to get used to it. What matters is what we feel." "What you feel," she corrected. I'm still trying to understand what I feel." "Then let me help you figure it out." Ethan began to whimper in David's lap. Sarah approached and took her son, automatically starting to rock him. "David, you're asking for too much too soon. Just a week ago, you didn't even know you had a son. Now you want us to become a traditional family?" "Why not?" Because the real world doesn't work that way. Because love doesn't solve social differences. Because your money won't make your family accept me. And what if I say I don't care what my family thinks? I'd say you're lying. To yourself and to me. David stood up, frustrated. Sarah, give me a chance. A real chance. What kind of chance? Come live with me for a month. If it doesn't work out, you can come back here and I'll respect your decision. And Ethan will have what he deserves. 2 parents, financial stability, a guaranteed future. And what will I have? Will I be your facade wife, your official mistress? You will be my partner, my family. Sarah looked at Ethan, who had calmed down and was now watching the 2 adults as if he understood that an important decision was being made. I need to think, she finally said. How much time do you need? I don't know, a few days. David moved closer to her and gently touched her face. Sarah, I know it sounds crazy, but sometimes the best things in life seem crazy at first. And sometimes crazy is just crazy. They looked at each other for a long moment, Ethan between them like a bridge connecting 2 completely different worlds. Can I kiss you? David asked softly. This time, Sarah didn't say no. She leaned in slightly and David kissed her gently, a kiss full of promises and fears, of hope and uncertainty. When they pulled apart, Ethan was watching them with curiosity, as if approving the display of affection between his parents. 2 days, Sarah said. Give me 2 days to decide. 2 days, David agreed. But they both knew that those 2 days would define the rest of their lives, and Ethan's life, who slept that night unaware that he was at the center of a decision that would change 3 destinies forever. The second day of Sarah's reflection coincided with the traditional summer festival of Smith and Partners, an event that David usually avoided but had decided to organize personally this year. It was a Friday in June, and the courtyard of the corporate building was decorated with colorful banners, food stalls, and a small stage where a country band was playing. Dr. David, are you really going to participate in the dance? Asked Sylvia from HR, visibly surprised to see him in the courtyard instead of the 32nd floor. I am, David replied, adjusting the plaid shirt he had bought especially for the occasion. And you, Sylvia, have you chosen your partner yet? The woman laughed, still incredulous at her boss's change in behavior. David Mendez had never shown interest in company, social events, preferring to send a representative while he worked late in his office. Across the courtyard, Sarah watched the activity while helping Mrs. Johnson organize the cornbread takeout at the stall. She wore a floral skirt she had bought at a downtown store, nothing too expensive, but it highlighted her natural beauty. Her hair was loose, with an artificial flower pinned to the side, following the tradition of the festival. Girl, you look absolutely stunning today, Mrs. Johnson commented, noticing how several men were looking in Sarah's direction. The outfit is perfect. Thank you, Mrs. Johnson, Sarah replied, but her eyes were searching for David in the crowd. When she finally saw him talking to other executives, she felt her stomach churn. He looked different, more relaxed, genuinely laughing. Ethan was in the lap of Lisa, who had come especially to meet the famous boss her friend had talked so much about. So that's Ethan's dad? Lisa asked, following Sarah's gaze. That's David. Good looking, Lisa observed. And by the way he's looking at you, he's really interested. He's not looking at me. He is. He's been pretending to pay attention to the executive's conversation while watching you for the past 5 minutes. Sarah blushed, trying to focus on organizing the takeout. The summer festival had been David's idea, a way to bring direct and contracted employees closer, breaking the rigid hierarchy that usually dominated the corporate environment. Good evening. David's deep voice made her turn. Dr. David, she replied formally, aware that Mrs. Johnson and other employees were watching their interaction. Can I talk to you for a minute? Sarah looked around, noticing the curious gazes. Sure, doctor. They moved away from the stall, heading to a more secluded corner of the courtyard, near an area with ornamental plants. Ethan stayed with Lisa, who promised not to lose sight of him. You look beautiful, David said when they were alone. Thank you. You also look different, more relaxed, she smiled shyly. David laughed. My grandmother always said that summer festivals are serious business. You can't go in a suit. And how was the second day of reflection? Sarah sighed. Confusing. Very confusing. Sarah. David, before you say anything, I need to tell you something that happened today. His expression became serious. What was it? Your mother came to see me. David's blood ran cold. She went to your apartment? No. She called me here at the office during lunch. David ran his hand through his hair, a gesture of nervousness that Sarah had learned to recognize. What did she say? A lot of things, but mainly she offered me money. How much? $500,000. David closed his eyes. It was an absurd amount for Sarah, but irrelevant by the standards of the Mendez family. To do what? To disappear, with Ethan, go to Illinois, start a new life, and never contact you again. What did you say? Sarah looked directly into his eyes, that she could shove her. Money where the sun doesn't shine. David couldn't hold back a laugh. You really said that? I did, those exact words. And her reaction? She was speechless for about 5 seconds. I don't think anyone has ever told Mrs. Johnson to shove her money. Sarah, I'm sorry. She didn't have the right. David, Sarah interrupted him. She had every right. She's protecting her son, her family, her assets. I understand her position. But you refused. I did. You know why? Why? Because Ethan deserves to know his father, regardless of whether I accept your crazy marriage proposal or not. He deserves to have you in his life. David felt a lump in his throat. And what about the crazy proposal? I'm still thinking about it. The band on stage started playing a more upbeat song, and other employees began to gather to form the traditional square dance. Want to dance? David asked, extending his hand. Here, in front of everyone? Why not? It's a summer festival. Everyone dances with everyone. Sarah hesitated. Dancing with David publicly would imply a closeness she wasn't sure she was ready to show. Come on, he insisted, just one song. She accepted his outstretched hand, and they joined the circle forming in the center of the courtyard. Mrs. Johnson nearly dropped a pot of corn pudding when she saw them together, and several employees stopped to watch the unusual spectacle of the CEO dancing square dance with one of the cleaning staff. The music was a traditional country song, and David showed that he had learned the steps well at his grandmother's farm. He led Sarah naturally, spinning her at the right moments, pulling her close during the slower parts of the song. You dance well, she commented during a turn. My grandmother wouldn't accept a grandchild who couldn't dance country. She taught you well. When the music ended, they stood in the middle of the circle for a few seconds, looking at each other. The entire courtyard was silent, observing the scene. Thanks for the dance, Sarah said, trying to break the tension. Thank you. Mrs. Johnson chose that exact moment to make her grand entrance into the courtyard. Dressed in a pristine suit that starkly contrasted with the relaxed atmosphere of the party, she looked like a queen visiting her subjects. David, her voice sliced through the air like a cold blade. Mom, I didn't know you were coming to the party. Evidently, she replied, her eyes fixed on Sarah. Miss Johnson. Mrs. Johnson, Sarah replied, lifting her chin with dignity. Can I speak with both of you? Privately. It wasn't a request. Mrs. Johnson headed to a conference room on the ground floor, expecting them to follow. David looked at Sarah, who gestured that it was okay. In the conference room, Mrs. Johnson closed the door and turned to them with an unreadable expression. "I just received an interesting call," she began, "from Marcus Smith at the Magazine Time." David felt his stomach drop. Marcus was an investigative journalist known for his stories about the personal lives of business people. "What did he want?" David asked, though he suspected the answer. "Confirmation of a story that reached him, about the CEO of Smith & Partners and a relationship with a contracted employee and a baby." Sarah paled. "How did he find out?" "Someone leaked the information," Mrs. Johnson replied. "Probably someone who saw you together today, or who knew about the paternity test." "The lab guaranteed absolute confidentiality," David said. "In the corporate world, David, absolute confidentiality doesn't exist. There's always someone willing to sell information." The silence in the room was tense. Mrs. Johnson studied the two of them for a moment before continuing. "I told Marcus there was nothing to comment on, but he will investigate anyway. And when the story comes out, not if, when, you two will be at the center of a media storm." "What does that mean?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It means," Mrs. Johnson replied, "that you have a choice to make, quickly." "What kind of choice?" David asked. Mrs. Johnson moved closer to the window, looking out at the courtyard, where the party continued merrily, oblivious to the drama unfolding above. "You can publicly acknowledge this relationship, turn it into a beautiful love story that the media will adore. Or you can deny everything. David can say he's just exercising corporate social responsibility, and Sarah can discreetly disappear." "Mum, let me finish," Mrs. Johnson interrupted him. "If you choose the first option, it better be real. The press will scrutinize every detail of your lives. If it's a charade, they will find out." Sarah sank heavily into one of the chairs. "And if we choose the second? I withdraw my previous offer. Instead of 500,000, I offer 2 million. You move to a different city, state if necessary. David pays child support through third parties. No one ever connects Ethan with the Johnson family." 2 million, Sarah repeated, stunned. "It's enough money for you to give Ethan a comfortable life, private education, health insurance, college, everything he deserves." David looked at Sarah, trying to decipher her expression. "Sarah, can I have some time to think?" "Until Sunday," Mrs. Johnson replied. "Marcus gave me until Monday for an official response. If we don't have a consistent version of the story by then, he will publish his version." Mrs. Johnson headed for the door, but paused before leaving. "Sarah," she said, her voice softer than before, "I didn't offer you money because I don't like you. In fact, after investigating your life, I respect you a lot." "Then why?" "Because I know how the world works. I know how the press treats women in your situation. I know how our society judges relationships between different social classes." Mrs. Johnson paused. "If you choose to stay together, it will be a battle against the media, against prejudices, against people who will question your motivations and judge your choices. And you think we don't have the strength for that battle?" Mrs. Johnson studied Sarah for a long moment. "I think you do. I'm not sure if my son does." After Sarah left, David and Sarah were alone in the conference room. Outside, they could still hear the music from the party, the laughter, life going on normally, while they were faced with a decision that would change everything. $2 million, Sarah said quietly. "That's a lot of money. It's more money than I would see in my entire life." "Sarah, David, answer me one thing with complete honesty. Whatever you want. If it weren't for Ethan, if it weren't for the pressure from the media, from your family, would you still ask me to marry you?" David looked her in the eyes. "Yes." "How can you be sure?" Because in the last few days, the only times I've felt truly happy were the ones I spent with you two. Because when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I think about is seeing you and Ethan. Because—" he paused, searching for the right words. "Because for the first time in my life, I feel at home when I'm with someone." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. "David, Sarah, I know it sounds crazy. I know we are very different. But true love always seems crazy at first. What if it doesn't work out? What if your mother is right about the prejudices, about the difficulties? Then we face them together, like a real family." Sarah stood up and walked to the window, watching the party below. She could see Lisa talking to Mrs. Johnson, Ethan probably sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Do you want an answer now?" "I want you to be sure of your choice," David replied, "whatever it is." Sarah turned to him and David saw determination in her eyes. "Then let's face it together. Does that mean—" "That means I accept your proposal, David Mendez. Not for the money, not for financial security, but because I believe you are a good man and can be an amazing father to Ethan." David quickly moved closer to her, holding her face in his hands. "And because you love me?" Sarah smiled, for the first time truly relaxed since Sarah had made her proposal. "Because I love you, yes. Against all logic, against all common sense, I love you." They kissed right there in the conference room, while below, the summer festival continued and their lives transformed forever. Outside, Sarah watched from her office window, allowing herself a small smile. Perhaps, just perhaps, this improbable relationship could work out. Monday arrived like a devastating storm. David woke up at 5 in the morning with his phone ringing insistently, his press team in total panic. The article had gone live on the magazine's online version at 4 in the morning and was already being replicated by all the news outlets in the country. Class love. Millionaire CEO acknowledges paternity of child with housekeeper and announces marriage, screamed the headline, accompanied by photos of David and Sarah dancing at the summer festival. In the Southside apartment, Sarah was awakened by Lisa's screams, who had seen the news on her phone. "Sarah! Sarah, wake up! You're on the internet!" Sarah jolted up, Ethan still sleeping peacefully in the crib. "What do you mean on the internet?" "Look at this." Lisa showed her the phone. "You're on all the news sites." Sarah read the article with growing horror. The journalist had managed to gather detailed information. Her age, where she lived, how long she had worked at the company, even details about Ethan like his birth weight and date. "How did they get all this?" she whispered. "Someone talked," Lisa replied grimly. "Someone from inside the company." Sarah's phone rang. It was David. "Sarah, did you see?" "I did, David. They know everything, even the name of the daycare where I left Ethan." "I know, my team is trying to manage the damage, but what?" "The press is at the company's door, and they probably already found out your address." As if it were a sinister prediction, the doorman of the building buzzed in at that moment. "Ms. Sarah, there are some journalists downstairs asking for you. What should I say?" Sarah felt the world spin. "Tell them that I'm not here." "Sarah, you need to get out of there," David said over the phone. "They're going to camp out at the door. Grab your things and go to my apartment." "Go to your apartment? David, that will make everything worse." "Sarah, trust me, I have a plan." 2 hours later, Sarah was in the back seat of David's car, with Ethan in her lap and a small bag with basic clothes. They had managed to sneak out through the back of the building with the help of the doorman who knew all the streets in the neighborhood. David's apartment in the gardens was everything Sarah had imagined: modern, luxurious, cold. Huge glass windows offered a panoramic view of the city, impeccably designed furniture decorated the rooms, and there was not a single personal item in sight. "It's big," she commented, clearly uncomfortable. It's empty, David corrected. It never felt like a real home until now. Ethan began to cry, and David immediately offered to take him. Sarah watched as he quickly learned the paternal gestures, the gentle rocking, the low voice, the genuine affection. "David, I need to tell you something," she said when Ethan calmed down. "Go ahead." "I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of all this. The press, your family, not knowing how to behave in your world." She paused, gathering courage. "Of you regretting it." David placed Ethan in the portable crib he had bought and moved closer to her. "Sarah, look at me. I will never regret it. What they're saying in the press doesn't matter." "It does matter. Look at what they wrote. Contract worker who got pregnant by her boss. Modern Cinderella seeks social ascension through relationship." "David, they're painting me as a gold digger. The people who matter know that it's not true." "What people? Your businessman friends, your family? They're all going to think I'm an opportunist who—" "You seduced him to get rich." The intercom of the apartment buzzed. It was the doorman. "Mr. David, there are journalists here too, and your mother is coming up." "My mother?" David sighed. "This is going to be interesting." Sarah arrived 15 minutes later, carrying several printed newspapers and an expression that mixed irritation with resignation. "Good afternoon," she greeted Sarah formally. "How are you dealing with the circus?" "As you can see, we're hiding," Sarah replied. "That's not a long-term solution," Sarah observed, sitting down in the living room. "The press won't give up until they have a complete story." "What kind of complete story?" David asked. "They want the romantic details. How you met, how you fell in love, when you found out about Ethan. If you don't give them an official version, they'll make one up." Sarah sat heavily on the sofa. "And what version can we give that is true but not humiliating?" Sarah studied her potential daughter-in-law for a moment. In the last 24 hours, she had come to a surprising conclusion. She liked Sarah. The young woman had dignity, intelligence, and a strength of character that Sarah recognized and respected. "The truth," Sarah said simply, "but well told." "What do you mean?" David asked. "You met in an informal situation, connected, had a special night but lost touch. Sarah discovered the pregnancy, but respected David's privacy. When fate brought you back together through Ethan's medical emergency, love resurfaced stronger than before." "That makes it sound like a romance," Sarah observed. "It is a romance," Sarah replied. "A real modern romance that shows how love can overcome social differences when it is genuine." "Do you really think that?" Sarah asked, surprised by Sarah's tone. "Sarah, I'll be direct with you. Initially, I wanted you to disappear. Not because I didn't like you personally, but because I feared for the impact on the company, the family, David's future. And now? Now I see that you two complement each other in a way I've never seen David complement anyone. And Ethan—" Sarah looked at the crib where the baby was sleeping peacefully. "Ethan is a Johnson. He has the right to carry our name and our legacy." David was stunned. "Mum, David, you are 42 years old. I started to think I would never have legitimate grandchildren, that I would never see you truly happy with someone. These last few weeks, you are different, better." "Because of her," David said, looking at Sarah. "Because of both of you," Sarah corrected. "Because of the family you are building." Sarah's phone rang. It was the company's press officer. "Carlos? Yes, I know about the article. What do you mean, live interview? On Globo? What time?" She hung up with a serious expression. "Marcos Silveira is going to give a live interview on the national news tonight. He promised to reveal exclusive details about the case." "What details?" Sarah asked, pale. "He will probably speculate about financial motivations, publicly question paternity, maybe even suggest that you planned everything from the start." Sarah stood up abruptly. "I won't let him destroy my reputation on national television." "What do you want to do?" David asked. "I want to give our version first. I want the whole of Brazil to know that I am not a gold digger, that our love is real, and that Ethan is the legitimate son of the man I love." Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile she directed at Sarah. "Now you are talking like a Johnson." "I'm not a Johnson yet." "You will be," David said, taking her hand, "if you still want to." "Of course I want," Sarah replied, surprising herself with the firmness of her answer. "But let's do this right." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. "I want a ceremony, small, simple, but simple, official. I want Ethan to see in the photos when he grows up that his parents married for love, not for scandal." David kissed her right there in front of Sarah. "When?" "Today," Sarah replied. "Before the journalist's interview. We will get married today and hold a press conference as husband and wife." Sarah picked up the phone. "I'm going to call the family friend judge and our press office." "Mrs. Johnson," Sarah called her as she was dialing. "Yes? Thank you for accepting our family." Sarah hung up the phone and approached Sarah. "Sarah, can I ask you a favor?" "Sure." "Stop with the Mrs. Johnson. If you were going to be my daughter-in-law, call me Sarah, or, when you feel comfortable—" She hesitated. "Call me Mom." Sarah felt her eyes fill with tears. "Thank you, Sarah." Ethan chose that moment to wake up, making soft noises. David picked him up, and Sarah came closer to see her grandson up close. "Can I?" she asked, extending her arms. David handed Ethan to his grandmother. Sarah held the baby carefully, and Ethan looked at her curiously before smiling. "Hi, my beautiful grandson," she whispered. "Welcome to the Johnson family." At that moment, in the luxury apartment in a prestigious neighborhood with the city of Chicago stretching beyond the windows and the media storm raging outside, an unlikely family finally came together. There were only a few hours left until the most talked-about wedding of the year, and they were ready to face anything the world could throw at them together. "We are getting married," David said, kissing Sarah again. "Yes," she agreed, looking at Ethan in his grandmother's arms. "Our family deserves this." Outside, Chicago continued its frantic life, unaware that there, in that apartment, 3 generations of the Johnson family were coming together in a way that would forever change the meaning of the word family for all of them. The wedding took place at 4 in the afternoon in an intimate ceremony at the local courthouse. Sarah wore a simple yet elegant white dress that Sarah had arranged at an emergency boutique and carried Ethan in her arms, the only ring-bearer of the ceremony. David wore a navy blue suit and couldn't stop smiling. The only witnesses were Sarah, Lisa, who had rushed over, Sarah Johnson, still wearing her nurse uniform, and Luke, Sarah's brother, who rushed from a small town in Illinois when he learned the news through the newspapers. "Do you take Sarah Johnson as your wife, to love and respect her in joy and in sorrow, in health and in sickness, in wealth and in poverty, all the days of your life?" asked the judge, a longtime friend of the Smith family. "I do," David replied, looking directly into Sarah's eyes. "And I promise to be the best husband and father I can be." "And you, Sarah, do you take David as your husband, to love and respect him in joy and in sorrow, in health and in sickness, in wealth and in poverty, all the days of your life?" Sarah looked at David, then at Ethan in his arms, finally at the people around her who now made up her chosen family. "I do," she said firmly, "and I promise to build with you a family based on true love and mutual respect." When the judge declared them husband and wife, Ethan chose that exact moment to let out his first genuine laugh, as if approving the entire situation. Lisa's tears of joy mixed with Mrs. Johnson's proud smile and Luke's evident relief. "Now we can kiss the bride," David said, leaning in to gently kiss Sarah. "Now you can face the world," Mrs. Johnson corrected, embracing the couple. An hour later, they were at the Smith & Partners headquarters on the 32nd floor, prepared for the press conference that would define how the world would view their relationship. Sarah had changed into a light blue dress that Mrs. Johnson had chosen, elegant but not ostentatious, conveying seriousness without frivolity. "Remember," instructed Mark, the press officer, "be natural, be honest, but keep the focus on your love and Ethan's well-being. Don't let malicious questions provoke you." The company's event hall was packed. Journalists from all the major networks in the country, television cameras, photographers with strobe flashes. Sarah felt her legs tremble when she saw the crowd. "It's okay," David whispered, holding her hand. "We're in this together." Ethan was in Mrs. Johnson's lap in the front row, observing everything with the natural curiosity of a 4-month-old baby. David approached the microphone first. "Good afternoon. My name is David Smith, and this is my wife, Sarah Smith." He made a point of emphasizing the surname. "We are here today to share our story with you because we believe that true love deserves to be celebrated, not sensationalized." He talked about that night at the bar, how they connected despite their social differences, about the reunion through Sarah's desperate call. "Love does not choose social class," David said, looking at Sarah. "It chooses hearts that complement each other." Sarah stepped up to the microphone, visibly nervous, but determined. "I know many of you are here today because you think this is a story about a poor woman who took advantage of a rich man," she began, her voice gaining strength. "Let me clarify a few things." She spoke about her life, how she raised Ethan alone, how she almost refused David's help at the hospital out of pride. "I didn't need David to survive. I needed him to be happy, and there is a huge difference between those two things." The first question came from a journalist from a major TV network. "Mrs. Smith, some critics suggest that you planned the pregnancy to achieve social ascension. How do you respond to that?" Sarah took a deep breath. "If I wanted social ascension, I would have sought out David as soon as I found out I was pregnant. Instead, I raised my son alone for 4 months, working as I always have. If that's a plan for social ascension, it's the worst plan in history." Laughter from the audience. The second question was for David. "Mr. Smith, your company does not have a history of valuing contracted employees. Don't you think it's contradictory to marry an employee while maintaining questionable labor policies?" "Great question," David replied. "And you are right. That's why I'm announcing today the creation of the Ethan program, named in honor of my son, which will offer scholarships, extended medical assistance, and professional training opportunities for all contracted employees of the company." Mrs. Johnson smiled from the audience. Her son had quickly learned how to turn criticism into opportunities. The third question was more direct. "Do you really believe that a marriage between such different classes can work?" David and Sarah looked at each other before responding. "Social class is circumstance," Sarah said. "Character is essence. The David I know is not the millionaire CEO. He is the man who learned to change diapers in 15 minutes, who sings to Ethan to sleep, who washes dishes in my apartment because he wants to help. And the Sarah I love," David continued, "is not the cleaning staff. She is the woman who raised a child with dignity in difficult circumstances, who refused financial help because she values her independence, who teaches me every day that true wealth has nothing to do with bank accounts." The press conference lasted an hour. By the time it ended, public perception had already begun to change. The hashtags True Love and Ethan Family dominated social media with messages of support. That night in their new home, a modest residence in a suburban neighborhood that David had bought at Sarah's insistence, no rich bachelor apartment, we want a family house, they finally had a moment of peace. Ethan was sleeping soundly in the crib in the next room. Sarah and David were in the small but cozy garden, watching the stars over Chicago. Few, but visible. "How do you feel, Mrs. Smith?" David asked, hugging his wife from behind. "Different, scared, happy," she replied, leaning against his chest. "And you?" "Complete. For the first time in my life. Complete." "David." "Thank you." "For what?" "For not giving up. For fighting for our family, when it would have been easier to just give me money and send me away." "Sarah, you still didn't understand?" "What?" David turned her to face him. "You and Ethan are the best thing that ever happened to me. I should be thanking you for giving me a chance." They kissed under the stars of Chicago, two worlds that had met and decided to build a third, new one, where love triumphed over prejudice and family meant choice, not just blood. Inside the house, Ethan slept with a smile on his face, unaware that he was the center of a story proving that sometimes, just sometimes, fairy tales happen. In real life, even if it's in small apartments, with wrong numbers and dirty diapers. 5 years later, on a sunny December morning, Ethan would run through the halls of the same company where his parents truly met, now transformed into a national example of social responsibility. He would carry in his little arms a doll he received from Grandma Sarah and shout for everyone to hear, "My mommy and daddy love each other so much." And David, watching the son who transformed his life, would remember that wrong number on an ordinary night and thank fate for sometimes, just sometimes, mistakes leading us exactly where we needed to be. The March rain falling on that future morning carried with it not just the end of summer, but the promise that love, when true, builds bridges that no social difference can destroy.